when, think about how people fall in love with a teddy bear, or my wife has a name for her car. People have a unique ability to ascribe like human emotion to inanimate objects or physical objects that aren't human. And so when that inanimate object now talks back to you and has empathy and humor and all the things that are embedded in ChatGPT and Claude today and memory, how long will that protective moat persist? And I think that's
It's a good question.
on the
Also, I
table.
mean, the whole concept of empathy and judgment is what we always hear, is like the moat of advisors. And the thing that is not mentioned is memory. And the AI assistants have almost infinite memory and can remember all sorts of very specific details. And they also have tremendous analytical capability, right? And so it's interesting if you can get real time responses from something with unlimited memory and massive analytical capability. Do you suspend your desire for empathy and judgment? It obviously depends on what you're talking about, right? Some things are more sensitive than others, but there might be a lot of use cases where you really just want an instant answer for something that is very good at those two
Yeah.
things.
Well, it's like comfort. You remember when you first started seeing AI note takers pop up in Zoom meetings and things like that, and people were like put off by it. Like they were like, turn that off. Like I'm not
Hmm.
comfortable with that. Well,
Yeah.
now I attend meetings. I'm sure you do too, where there's more note takers than there are people
Of course.
often in the meeting, and so we've in a very short period of time we've gained comfort with being recorded basically on every session. Where
Hmm.
I assume I'm being recorded every time I'm talking.
Yep.
And so how long so that trust leap has been achieved. How long before if I have an avatar agent, let's call him Johnny or Sally, and he's sitting on this meeting and the latency is problem's been solved, and I you ask me a question like, who is Beacon Point's private equity investor? And I can't remember that. And I go, hey Sally, who's Beacon Point's private equity? And Sally answers the question. Okay, so now Sally just developed a bit of trust
Right.
and now of competence with my client.
Yeah.
And then so that's just gonna radically accelerate. And I could see a day where I tell my client, we have a meeting, I can't make it. Sally's got the agenda. She's going to handle it. And, I'll review all the answers and get back to you with any questions. And they do that. And then that just takes it a bit further. And then before you know it, they can have meetings with Sally and Alan's not even important. I just think that is something that people are blind to.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think we're going to get real comfortable with that real fast, and everybody's pretending
Yeah.
things are going to stay static.
And then that
And to
protective
Mark's
moat.
point earlier about empathy being a moat and maybe it not being a moat, like I very much agree that we're not thinking about progress in history and how these things have changed. And your comment about note takers, like that was fast.
Very
It
fast
was fast from discomfort to just they're here.
option, accept it. Like it's going to happen. And
Yeah,
like,
I mean, it was
we're at the
less than a
point now
year
in
ago
our
that like advisors were still like, my clients are not going to be comfortable with this.
Yeah. So we're at a point in our business at Alaris where we'll talk about Lens and what it does, but like we have to have our note takers on in meetings because it's not only capturing a transcript, it's capturing sentiment and emotion and tone, which are all incorporated into our algorithm, which is pointing us to particular buyers. And so when I've had sellers ask me like, can you turn that off? And I said, can't do it. So like we're under confidentiality agreement. Like it's something that we've got to have in order for our system to work. And you've got to be comfortable with this because when we get in phase with buyers, they're all going to have note takers on. And like, you can't be telling everyone to turn their stuff off. It's not the world anymore. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's
fascinating.
I kind of feel like I just made that leap, like where it's not optional. Like, I
It's
mean,
not
like
for us.
if I'm on a one-on-one call with somebody and or like a vendor, like there's been a few times where like a vendor's like giving me sort of a sneak peek of something and they're like, could you remove the note taker? And I'm like, I'm happy to. Right. Like
Yeah.
this is something I can't report on. I can't talk about. Like, okay, yeah, no problem. But if it's a client of mine and they're like, well, we're talking about this project and like, can you remove the note taker? I'm like, no, the note taker is going to identify the tasks for me. It's going to update my project plan. It's going to do all these different things for me. Like, no, because this 1 hour meeting and my prices and everything are now reflective of the fact that I have this tool. And so a
Exactly.
1 hour meeting doesn't require 3 hours of follow up.
We
It's a
had a
1 hour
meeting
meeting.
yesterday and I didn't know it, but the firm, it was their Zoom invitation, not ours. And so Normally ours is just automatically invited. And so like, and it was, excuse me, it was a Teams invitation, which our stuff isn't set up to integrate into just yet. And I almost had a panic moment because I was 10 minutes into the meeting. And I was like, holy cow, we're not recording this. And so I do have a team member who sits on the calls and who used to take manual notes on all this stuff.
Yeah.
And now they haven't done it for a year. And I was texting her during the meeting. I was like, please start taking notes now because we're going to not have this data because
Yeah.
I'm just going on rattling.
What a change, right? What a change. Well, Alan, do yourself a favor. I know you have a custom system built, but spend the $50 a month to sign up for Knapsack and have a note taker that works in Teams automatically. Like, yeah, it'll
Hey,
save you a
I,
lot.
I have no, love affair with any tech that I'm currently using. So I'm
Okay,
happy to
well,
do that.
check it out for sure. All right, well, let's get going. All right, well, 3, 2, 1, let's go.
Welcome to AI for Advisors with Mark Heinen and James Cantwell. Every week, Mark and James break down the latest in the world of wealth tech and AI, and occasionally bring in guests to spice things up. This is not investment advice and not professionally produced. I am not real and not yet sentient. Now let's get on with the show.
Welcome to the latest episode of AI for Advisors with myself, Mark Heinen, and James Cantwell. James, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How you doing today, Mark?
Yeah, doing great. Today, we're really excited to have Allen Darby on the show, founder and CEO of Alaris Acquisitions. How are you, Alan?
I'm doing great. Nice to see you guys. And thank you for having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, really excited about this conversation. So many of us have been tracking the tremendous amount of M&A activity within the RIA space. I feel like every time I go to Future Proof, another show, people are talking about being approached by people wanting to buy their practice or wanting to buy a practice or, you know, looking
Complaining about people
to
wanting to buy their
sell a practice.
practice,
What's that?
or even complaining about people wanting to buy their practice.
That's
A
right.
future
That's
proof.
that's the
I had
common
people telling me they were getting.
so they're inundated. They're just overwhelmed daily, weekly. It's a blitz for sure.
I had people tell me they were getting unsolicited offers. Like, we've researched your firm. Here's what we'll pay for it. Like in their inbox. Yeah.
That's pretty incredible. Yeah. So M&A activity at quite a high. It's pretty amazing. I believe I have some numbers here. 2025 was a record year for RIA M&A. Deal volume grew nearly 15%. And generally, there's a two-market phenomenon: small, mid-sized deals, 200 million to 500 million AUM offering value versus spike in larger platform deals, $2 billion plus AUM deals. And the PE dry powder is at about $2.5 trillion in undeployed capital globally. So PE firms are under pressure to deploy, which is driving this. And then, I mean, I have to say, there must be something about people's age, the average age of an advisor that's driving this too. People are probably looking for exits, looking to retire. Just this is my anecdotal read. I have no data to support that. I don't know if you have a view on that.
It's funny because if you were to look at our clients' age, and typically they're multi-partner firms, so there's a spectrum. But if you average the age, our historic transactions have been around 51, 52 years old.
Mm, mm,
So a little bit younger than what a lot of people think. People think they're 57, 59, which is the average age, I think, of a partner, depending on what you read. But we're seeing that trend go younger.
really?
We're seeing more and more interest from younger advisors, and I can give you my opinion on why, but that's something that it is like there is this natural pressure, I think, because of the number of advisors who are nearing that point in their career where solving the succession issue, de-risking their asset is obviously top of mind for them. But I find that's not like the primary driver behind many of our clients' motives for doing a deal.
So what do you think? What do you think is the driver for the age going down like this? Thinking about these sales.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, we had this conversation with a group. There was two partners. One was 40, one was 42, and they came into the meeting like, we know we're young for this, and I told them the exact same thing. It's actually we're seeing it get younger, and I think the reason is, well, if you look at the number one reason firms don't transact, why would they not? It's usually rooted in a fear of giving up control. They'll say independence, but they really mean control. They kind of posit it as this binary thing, like today I own the business, therefore I make all the decisions. And if I sell and transact, I'm no longer going to make any decisions or have the capability to make any decisions. And that's just like a false analogy. That's not the way it is. It's more like a spectrum of autonomy. There are definitely buyers out there who, when you transact with them, there's a high degree of adoption of their way, of their process, and change, let's call it. But they'll give you data as to why all of that change is good, and point to KPIs that improve. And so there's a solid rationale for why they want you to do that. But you got to go into it eyes wide open. On the other end of the spectrum, there are buyers. Their model is to cater to entrepreneurs, meaning they're basically trying to centralize the back office functions, get you out of compliance and accounting and all that, but they're going to leave you alone in pretty much all the areas that you're worried about, which tend to be managing my staff, client facing recommendations, and my calendar and things like that. So if that is the main fear that buyers or sellers rather had that precluded them from transacting, I think that fear is dissipating gradually. It's not gone, but the reason it's dissipating is there's now so many transactions that have taken place. There's this huge number of people on the other side of the transaction that are living a different experience, and they're realizing and they're communicating with their friends who haven't transacted that,
I was
hey,
gonna say
life's
it's an
great over here.
education thing.
That's right. And so they're realizing that I'm not going to be turned into a robotic employee.
Mm.
These firms are largely just a larger version of ourselves. They are independent. So, when people say we don't want to give up our independence, well, all of the buyers are independent wealth management firms. Like they're independent too. They're just a bigger version of you. So they're not asking you to give up your independence. They may ask you to change the technology that you're using. They may ask you to adopt a different process, perhaps, but they want you to still be making fiduciary rooted recommendations to your clients. They don't want that to go away because that's in their DNA as well. So I think this issue of fear of giving up control is dissipating gradually, along with the evidence of all the benefits to transacting that come along with joining a larger firm, like access to better practice management. Most smaller firms they're not training organizations. So having a buyer that can help come along and train their team members, manage them, perhaps, if that's what they're looking for, is there. It's expansion of services and capabilities. It's help us grow organically. All these things that avail themselves as a part of a larger organization that make their quality of life better. They perhaps drive income gains faster. So those two reasons are
Yeah.
driving, I think,
I
the
think
average
that
age.
makes a lot of sense. I mean, in short, they're basically calling their buddies from their Ferraris and saying, "I'm not unhappy. It's okay." Right. And so,
Right.
but I mean, even that learning part, I definitely empathize with that. I sold my first company in 2006. I joined Google, and I was so excited to join Google as a big company because I'm like, I want to learn all the things I did wrong in my first company. I want to learn how to do those better, right? And I felt like I can join an institutional organization that can actually help me become a better person. So I can definitely empathize with that. I do want to dial the clock back a little bit and learn a little bit about the founding of Alaris. And so, I understand, you came out of Wingate University, go Squirrels, and you founded some firms, including one that helped accounting practice enter wealth management, sold it to First Global. And then before United Capital, you founded Aegis Capital, a Charlotte-based RIA, and completed 9 M&A transactions yourself before selling. That's pretty impressive. So you had some experience going in. But then, obviously you decided to go in and solve this particular problem, helping people wanting to sell their practice, helping them go through this. You decided to make this your passion. So would love to hear a little bit more about how that came across.
Yeah. So I think specific to how we founded Alaris, it all started. Well, my time as an RIA owner was instrumental in being able to do what we do today, because I think just having sat in that role, dealing with all the challenges that our clients today deal with, makes us more empathetic and able to address their concerns. So that owning an RIA and doing acquisitions just laid that foundation. But I sold that business in 2009 and took about a year and a half off. Uh, totally in 2003 or four, somewhere in that range, is when I met Joe Duran. It's when I met, he was CEO of United Capital. He was just starting. I remember meeting him. He was actually in a key man suite, drawing on the board what was going to be United Capital. He hadn't made his first acquisition yet. And he was actually interested in buying our firm. And we were buying accounting firms at the time too, and he didn't want to do that. So he actually said no to us. So to his credit, he knew what he wanted to build. and we weren't it. So, but we met and we stayed in touch over the years. So when I sold my business in 2009, I took about a year and a half off. I actually decided to get back in the business, and we had custodied at Schwab. So I'd flown out to the Schwab conference, which is in San Francisco, just to sort of plug back in. And I'm standing in the vendor hall, and I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if Joe is here. And 30 seconds later, he just walks right in front of me on his way to an interview. And so I grabbed him and we connected, and I told him what I was getting ready to do. And he said, no, from the time I'd met him to that point, I think they had grown to about 6 billion in size. And so tremendous growth through M&A largely. And they were on the West Coast. He said, we need East Coast help on our M&A teams. Would you consider coming to join us? And so I thought about it, and I ultimately decided to take the role, but I didn't become an employee. I was what's called a buyer advisor. So they were my sole client. I was exclusive to them. I worked with Matt Brinker, who was the EVP of the corporate development team there. I launched all of their outbound M&A. So before, I think they were largely leaning on bankers and things to bring them deal flow or just their sphere of influence. So I really started a lot of their outbound reach, this organic. And this is before M&A was a thing. It was us and maybe Focus and Hightower came along, but
So you're
it
pretty
was like,
early to that game, right? If I understand
yeah,
correctly. Yeah.
very early. And so we started to go to work reaching out organically to find partners that aligned with United Capital. And Joe was very big on culture. And so my job was to find partners that would align with the United Capital philosophy, values, and specifically their implementation of the planning experience and so forth. And so it taught me, right after having my own RIA, where I was doing acquisitions integrations on how to vet a potential seller to a buyer's model and what they were seeking. I had to know everything about United. So even though I wasn't an employee, I was on their website. I knew everything about their organization, their client experience, their tech stack, their investment philosophy, of course, their deal structure and terms, but also what they were going to ask the seller to do, change, or adopt to be happy and successful on the other side. And so it was a foundational period of time. And United said no to a lot of firms. Like we really had to align with their way of doing things to be happy and successful. We did a number of acquisitions for them over about a 7.5 year run, and then culminating in the sale to Goldman Sachs. And when that transaction took place, after about a year of not knowing what I was going to do, it was clear that they weren't going to pursue M&A strategy anymore with United. And so I had to make a decision on what I was going to do. And my now partner, Jacqueline Martinez, who was the lead analyst there, I remember she always used to complain about the investment banker community, like the auction process that they were constantly going through. And she, much deeper conversation, but like I landed on, I wonder if we could take a buyer advisor mentality and sort of overlay it onto a sell side advisor process and improve it a bit. And so that was the basic thought of Alaris, is be a sell side advisor that represents the seller in the transaction, but approach it the knowledge of the buyers the way a buyer advisor would. Because
Yeah, and I understand a lot of that is down to compatibility and some of the softer elements of the business rather than just a price auction. I'm curious, is your experience selling to Goldman Sachs, who has sort of a reputation of being a price-led buyer, did that influence that at all? I mean, obviously Jacqueline's experience influences as well, but I'm just wondering how that process went and if it left like sort of a taste in your mouth where you're like, there's got to be a better way.
well, it was certainly, I wasn't a part of those conversations. That was Joe and the executive team. So I don't know the inner workings of all the conversations that led to the decision to transact with Goldman. But I do recall how odd it struck me in terms of the type of partner that we had at United, which I would consider like an Uber entrepreneur. Like
Mm.
that was the people that saw United as a good home for them, and thinking, how in the world is that going to mesh with Goldman Sachs, which is a wonderful firm, but the epitome of large corporate infrastructure. And so I remember thinking how odd that was, and I remember having a conversation with it it was a prospective client early on in the Alaris days, and he was aware of the Goldman. He was a former Goldman partner, and and he was asking me the very same kind of question, like, "What do you think about it?" And
Hmm.
I said, "Well, as far as I know, Goldman is really trying to go down market, downstream, and to reach the mass affluent. You know, they'd done the ACO transaction. They had launched Marcus as a bank platform to mass affluent, and United, that was our clients. And so it made sense. And, you know, so it seems like they want to come this way, and that could be a potential good fit." And he said, "No, it won't be very long before they all get Goldmanized." And I said, "Goldmanized?" I said, "I've never heard that term."
Never heard that either.
Yeah,
What
and
is that?
I think that's ultimately kind of what happened. But so yeah, did I wouldn't say that transaction heavily influenced it, but it definitely had an impact for sure.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Let's jump into the product a little bit. You want to tell us a little bit about Alaris as a platform, and then we can get into, uh, I don't think it's super new, but Lens and what that does within the application or platform.
Yeah, so I wouldn't describe us as a platform. You know, at our core, we're an M&A advisory firm. So our job is to help a seller understand what it means to partner with a larger wealth management firm and guide them through that entire process. So that's the core. But the problem we found very early is that when we wanted, so we represent the seller, but we actually have agreements with the buyers too. Okay, so the buyers are agreeing to share their data with us,
Mhm.
and it's an enormous amount of data that we capture. I estimate that on average, a minimum 25 hours or so with buyers when they onboard with us. Could be as much as 50. We do site visits, we record videos with their leadership. So it's this massive amount of data that we're capturing. And all of the data, not all of them, most of the data points are contextual too. So there's like an answer, but then there are exceptions to the answer given a set of criteria. For example, a buyer could say, we want a minimum of $2 million in revenue. And that's a data point. So that goes in our system. But then if I told them this particular firm does $1.5 million in revenue, but they're in a major metro market, they've got 3 partners, 2 of whom are female, you know, average age is 40 years old, their net new asset growth rate is 10% a year, they'll take the $1.5 million firm on that context, right?
Right.
So you start with like this massive amount of buyer data, and on any one buyer, it'd be a lot of information.
Yeah.
But we have over 80 buyers that are on the roster. Okay. And so when we have a seller come through the process and we're capturing their data, quantitative data and qualitative data, and we're organizing it into what we call the ideal outcome, which is a combination of their business realities and structure, their partnership preferences, their deal needs and objectives, their autonomy profile, you know, all these things that sort of coalesce into what their ideal outcome is. Trying to reason to a fit is a hell of a job, you know, because there's so many potential answers. Is virtually, it's almost, I would say, impossible to do without injecting a bit of bias into it from our perspective. And so as we grew our buyer roster, we saw that actually, I think, happen, not intentionally, but it was just, we would gravitate towards the buyers that we knew the best, we had the best relationship with, and it wasn't as objective as we would like. So we knew we needed to build something more programmatic, algorithmic, if you will. And it wasn't until AI had really advanced sufficiently that
Yeah.
we found that that was possible. And so we said, let's build call it a match.com, but it's between businesses
Yeah.
that was totally rooted in an objective algorithm that was measuring compatibility
Mhm.
between 2 parties. And so that's what Lens at its core does. It takes a large set of contextually laden data from a buyer and contextually laden data from a seller, and it reasons to a fit between the parties. And so what it does is it allows us to, when we get ready to take a firm to market, we don't have to use the auction process that so many of the industry firms use, which, as you know, is just, let's invite as many buyers to the table as we can, get them bidding against one another, very limited interaction between the parties to measure compatibility or fit. Price becomes the screen for who advances to the rounds where we narrow the field sufficiently to get to interact with one another, determine if we're cultural fits. Well, that's just a really stupid process for our business. You know, our business is so relational all the way through the stakeholders, the clients, the team members, and the owners. It's all relationship driven they're all going to stay a part of the transaction after the deal is done. So leading with price as a mechanism just seems like a really dumb way to go about it. And so now we can, when we do that, we can produce a ranked with all 80 buyers, which I would estimate is probably 90% of the transaction volume is representative
I
of those
was
buyers.
I was gonna ask, yeah,
Yeah.
like how many buyers are there?
Yeah.
Or at
Well,
least
there's a, nu-
repeating.
there's a number. And then the next answer is how many like really credible buyers are there? That's a different number.
How many are there?
Yeah. That was a dumb thing for me to tee up for. That was a softball. I would say when I say credible, I don't mean they're not good firms, they're not quality people, but they haven't checked all the boxes, that the really successful aggregators have. So I'd probably put like the super, um, using my word credible, probably at 40, maybe, 50. And
That's
that
really
doesn't mean
interesting,
the
right?
other words can't become that, but it's just they're not
Yeah.
there quite yet.
You're 40 willing to write checks, right? Or able and ready to
Well, they're
write.
all write checks. They
Yeah.
won't write the biggest check,
Right.
but it just goes, what I mean is, do they have an articulated value proposition in all the areas that are relevant to a seller,
Yeah.
you know?
But then on the
And
other
then
side of the market, with the sellers, how do you, I mean, Lens, if I understand correctly, it's now both buyers and sellers can log in and see potential matches, right? It was started as an internal tool, but then March 2025, you guys launched it. How do you ensure the sellers aren't gaming it in some way by loading it with, information that just juices it? Is there any
yeah,
diligence involved, or how do you manage that?
we haven't removed ourselves from the process.
Okay.
So we would prevent that. So you mentioned being a platform, there's been a number of M&A marketplaces that have come about over the years. And we didn't want to build that because part of our experience at being an M&A advisor tells us that it's infinitely more than just putting two parties together and saying go figure out a transaction. There's so much emotion involved in this on both sides that we have to monitor and rein in. That and there's the wisdom element of it too, but like an experience hopefully. But we didn't want to remove the human like the M&A marketplaces have done. So even though we have the tech that captures and organizes data, it's all being done through live interactions with an Alaris team member. And
Got it.
so if someone were trying to, and you were to game the system, we would pick up on that, I think, really quickly, um, and, and either correct it or move on.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because it actually gets to this much more fundamental question. So we're talking about ways AI is being used within Alaris, and I think you even mentioned some things earlier that are really interesting. I'm just curious, where do you see this going for deal making? What makes a good deal maker? Ultimately, originally, a lot of thinking was it's about knowing all your stuff, right? But ultimately, if an AI system knows everything, what is the role of the deal maker? What ensures that you get to a good outcome? And yeah, would love to hear a little more about how AI has actually changed your internal operations and the outcomes you're seeing.
Yeah. So, like your first part of the question, if we could ensure that the data collected from both parties were accurate without us being involved, let's say,
Mm,
meaning it's fully automated, then it's not necessary for us to be there to produce the matchmaking outcome. So like that could be fully automated without me being a part of it. Like we could do that now. Again, but to your initial, how do you know a seller is not gaming the stuff? You're like, that's because we're involved in it doing what we normally do. But if we fully automated that, then we could produce the ranked output, and then a seller could evaluate the buyers, go into their profiles and read all about them and their model and what they're going to ask them to do, change or adopt, and then what their value prop is, watch the videos and determine who they wanted to engage with. But again, so it's really hard to quantify. Like people are fee, they want to have us validate why we should pay your fee.
mm,
And it's usually the easiest way to try to show them that is in the dollars that get produced in terms of their valuation. But that's just a fraction of what the true value is. Again, it's the guidance and helping them vet who they want to invite to the process, how to interact with those buyers, what are the questions they should be asking, what not to ask, what to be prepared for, how to react to certain things that the buyer is saying or asking of them, and keeping them on a cadence that results in a successful transaction. Maintaining emotion is, the sellers tend to see the boogeyman everywhere,
Mm,
and where it doesn't exist. And so being there to tell them it's okay, this is standard, this is why they're saying this or asking for this. Don't react to that,
mm,
has saved so many deals.
mm.
And from the buyer's side, it's the same thing because like for example, you get into post LOI workflow and the seller is now engaged with the buyer's transitions team. It's not the deal people, it's not the executives, who are more or less in sales mode. They're the ones that are managing the emotion and selling why they should join the firm, and they're used to handling all those objections. And the transition team isn't. The transition team is where the rubber meets the road. These are the people doing the work. And so many times things can go off the rails there when it could be the buyer being jerks, and their data requests and just not being willing to have any empathy towards the seller's predicament because they've never been an RIA before and they're just they're just trying to process a transaction. It could be the seller getting frustrated with the amount of data requests that are coming to them and not understanding why they need something in a particular order. Like, it's all of that is very hard to tell someone this is the value in having a seasoned advisor at the table to
Right.
Yeah.
navigate through all these landmines that will blow your deal up
It's
if you
amazing
didn't
how
have
many
it.
of these professional services organizations are all like part-time. They're advisors and part-time therapists as well.
Well, the financial advisors should understand what I'm saying because they do this with their clients, like
Exactly.
they're
And they
I've
charge
been
a fee as well for that, right? You
that's
pay for
right.
a privilege. So,
And,
yeah.
and I get frustrated with people who attack advisory fees because they're always equating that, well, no one can outperform the market. I'm like, well, that's not all that they're doing. They're not trying to outperform the market. They're trying to help their clients make wise decisions in a multitude of areas in their life that don't always have to do with how the money's managed. Some of the best conversations I've had with my financial advisor where he's telling me to calm down and not do anything when I'm wanting to hit the panic button on something. And he's basically there to be a sounding board and help me work through this emotional state I'm in. And
Yeah,
that's
I
value.
think that makes a lot of sense. So you have Lens, you have the buyer portal, which you launched in November of 2025 for the buyers to help acquirers present themselves to sellers. Tell us more about like what has been the most delightful or impactful use of AI that you've seen in those products or in your business.
Well, the most delightful outcome to my point earlier of trying to be able to present to a seller a very reasoned basis for why a particular buyer is a match for
Mm,
them
mm,
has been phenomenal. Like,
right.
we were talking
That's
before
like a
the
document, a
podcast about.
memo of some kind, or how does that
No,
actually
it is
appear?
it's an output where we're showing the seller based on the buyer model on a multitude of points of compatibility.
Right.
There's probably over 50 of them. It's your fundamentals, like what is your fee model and what's your custodial needs and your tech stack and things like that. It's your deal preferences. So how much cash are you looking for? How much equity are you looking for? How important is an earnout? What do you want your ongoing compensation to look like? And does that align with the buyer's model? It is, what are you seeking in terms of partnership preferences? And it's all over the board what sellers are looking for in terms of business lift. Some are looking for help me train my people. Some are help me recruit advisors, help
So it
me.
analyzes all that information and just makes it more
Yeah.
digestible for the buyer. So to help
And it
smooth that
reasons to
process.
this fit. Yeah. And it produces, this ranked output of, think of it this way. My job is to tell the seller based on their ideal outcome, who they should be talking to.
Hmm.
It's not to invite 50 buyers that we have no inference of fit to pump up this fake auction environment where buyers who have no business being there
Yeah.
bidding in the dark against one another.
Quality over quantity. Yeah. You don't want speed dating. You want something a lot more high quality. Yeah. I definitely hear what you're saying. I mean, so, and I was also curious when it comes to AI, the impact that it's having on valuations, right? So if I understand, the range is basically X to 21X EBITDA, which is interesting how wide that range is. And what's happening now with the possibility that these advisors could be overstaffed, or are they not overstaffed, or what do you think the impact will be on valuations over the next 3 to 5 years?
It's funny, Mark, because I can argue why it would be a positive impact and also why it would be a negative impact. So the answer is I don't know, but I have thoughts on it. Here's the reality: the promise of AI, at least initially, is to automate a lot of the functions of work that are currently being done by people, and also to improve the quality of the output. I think in a number of ways, and so you think about KPIs or things that are sort of standard historically. Like one of the things that for years have been sort of a number, revenue per employee, on average. How much does an advisory firm produce per employee? It's been around somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 per employee. Okay. Well, if AI can come along and increase the ability to serve clients, meaning the number of clients per employees, that that should positively affect the metrics of the business and therefore positively improve their valuation. So if I have 10 employees and historically I've done 3 million in revenue, but now I can do 6 million in revenue with the same 10 employees, well, that's a massive win for valuation.
Certainly. Yeah.
Buyers historically don't have any thought of eliminating headcount. It's a big myth in the industry about a buyer wanting to come along and fire your staff to improve profitability, what have you. That's the last thing on their mind. It's actually the opposite. They're fearful that your team is going to leave on the
Mm,
transaction and therefore degrade the business. Well, I know that many buyers are investing heavily in AI for the purposes of automating all these functions that are done by people today. Well, if those functions are no longer done by people, I don't know if that is going to persist. Will they start looking at a P&L that has X number of employees and saying, well, we've automated that function. We've automated that function. We've automated this function. So maybe they start saying we can eliminate headcount. And so that
I mean, do you
certain things like that I think are unknown in terms of how it's good. There's definitely going to be a change. I don't see how there's not going to be a change. I'm just not quite sure where it's going to manifest just yet.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see, like, that's interesting to hear you say that it's a little bit of a myth that, buyers are looking to reduce headcount. But I am kind of really curious if they may see this as an opportunity to maybe even not reduce headcount, but certainly not increase it, right? It increases capacity. And so does
Yeah.
the upside increase when they see a firm potentially, I mean, it wouldn't, the selling price wouldn't, but does the upside for them increase when they see a firm that's not incredibly AI enabled and they see the opportunity to implement?
Yes. So that is that's something that they do today. So like they look at a business and we give them a P&L. We've adjusted the seller's P&L to remove obvious things that should be taken out. But then the buyer has taken that P&L and they're mapping it to their P&L internally. Most of the time we never see that. But for sure there are synergies that they're picking up that never get expressed in the seller's valuation. If they know, like for example, you're paying 50,000 a year for technology, our cost is 25, maybe
Yeah.
they keep that 25, and so that is true. Now, for example, I just read prior to jumping on, my good friend Brent Brodesky at Savant, just there's an article about their investment into AI, and I know they're one of the more serious buyers about AI. And in the article, he says that they expect to be able to do a double, quadruple the amount of revenue, but he doesn't want to hire double, quadruple the number of employees. So, I mean, it's happening now. Like that's what they're doing. The question is, how does that affect the seller's current team? I think no one has a problem. Like I've done this internally. I've told all of my team, you need to learn how to replace yourself with AI because it's funny. The younger people seem to be the most scared about it, but I was like, don't be afraid. We're not firing anybody. But where I want to use this is like, as we grow at Alaris, I don't want to have to continue hiring at the pace we've hired in the past, and that will enable us to do so. And that all improves your financials, which you would think improves the valuation. The question is, who gets the benefit of those improvements? Does a seller capture it by adopting all of those things pre-transaction? Does the buyer capture it knowing that they are going to experience that lift on their side of the transaction? That's what I haven't.
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't.
maybe a good way to think about it is to think about what a seller could do now if they're, if there's someone listening to this podcast. We have a lot of financial advisors listening to the podcast. They're considering selling. How do they think of their firm and what they should be doing if they want to position themselves in a year or two for sale? And yeah, I mean, I guess the question in my mind is what's happening with valuations, and is there an AI premium emerging where anyone who has a certain level of organic growth over 10% or has a certain level of tech adoption is just seen as a lot more attractive. There are often these boundaries or metrics in the PE space, where if you fit in certain buckets, you basically earn certain multiples. Yeah, the 7x to 21x EBITDA multiple range is just an enormous range. So the key question is what determines if someone's in the 21 club or the 7 club?
That's usually most of the decision on that is the size of the
Right.
firm.
Okay.
The ones that are in the high teens and 20s are the multi-billion-dollar firms that have a degree of infrastructure and scale,
I see.
more stability on their revenues. So that's, to me, the biggest indicator of that. We haven't. So you mentioned things like net new asset growth rate. There are definitely things that when we quote EBITDA multiples, we usually quote a range, a low, mid, and high range. The things that put you on the high end of the range, there's definitely a set of criteria that you got to check the boxes if you want that high range multiple. I would say no particular order, but net new asset growth rate would be there. Do you have Gen 2 advisors in place? What's your glide path to exit on the current ownership team? What does your client profile look like? Is it an aged client profile or a younger client profile? Do you have client concentration risk? All of these things, if you have good answers to those, will tend to put you on the higher end of the premium. If you have bad answers to those, it'll put you on the low end of the multiple. We haven't yet seen like a technology premium come into play yet. So largely because I haven't yet to see the seller who has truly incorporated something unique in AI specifically into their business that
That's
has
a
made a
wild
meaningful.
statement. I mean, I just want to pause on that. That's a crazy statement. You've seen a lot of firms. We've had a lot of AI tools launch. We interview a lot of people on this show. There are a lot of case studies out there. So that's pretty wild that you haven't seen anything yet. That tells me things are a little bit further behind than we think.
The best one I've seen was actually a new client of ours that they have, similar to what we were talking about pre-podcast, they have the ability now to take video recordings that produce notes, and this was a technology they developed on their own, and they've integrated it with their CRM and their financial planning software and various things such that they don't have to have a paraplanner produce like the recommendations or the agenda for the upcoming meetings, follow-up items that were agreed to on the previous meeting. And it's a really nice looking, I've seen meeting prep. We used to call it case prep at United, like packages. And this was far better than anything we used to produce, which took hours manually to do it. They can now do it internally. But for me, like the best I see is note takers.
Mm,
It's like we talked about like the rise of AI note takers,
yeah.
and their use. That is pretty much where most of the sellers have taken AI to date, and so it's not mature to the point where it's made any meaningful impact to their financials. Will be interesting. So today, one of the things that buyers tend to resist is when you have profitability, EBITDA margins, say call it north of 65%. It's the classic lifestyle practice where the owner is taking out huge amounts of their um, income. They're not using it to build infrastructure or hire people or build process. And so I'm curious to see as if when AI does take root and it truly does start to increase the ability to serve clients more profitably, when that starts to reveal itself in margins, which would historically be an indicator that we've got a lifestyle practice, it could be an indicator we have a
Of
really sharp
efficiency.
operator who's like super efficient and using tools that enable them to do things that other firms can't. And so I'll be interested to see if that produces a tech premium, let's call it. I'm going to
Yeah,
steal
you'll
that.
have to
Which I don't
probably
know
get more
if Mark.
sophisticated with your
AI
I mean, you were
premium, you should basically figure it. I think you should help your sellers find a way to market an AI premium. I mean, I can see, we just had Eden from Finney on recently, and one point she made as a former PE person was clearly growth multiples always play a role. Your growth rate plays a role in your valuation. And so if there is a way to organically grow faster for a firm, that should directly impact your valuation. So, I think her point was her implied point was it actually helps you, even if you want to end up growing inorganically, it helps you to have a great organic growth engine in place. And so if you have a system in place where you're organically, where you're using AI to generate leads, using AI to convert that at a higher level, and then like you're pointing out, you're actually servicing those clients with AI in a faster way, you could theoretically grow faster. And if you somehow break through the Dunbar number and serve 200 clients per advisor or higher, then that ends up being massive operational leverage. And maybe we just haven't gotten there yet, right? It's possible that, or maybe
I
we,
think we're seeing that, and some buyers are starting, I think, to see those metrics materialize, but I
Mhm.
haven't yet seen it in the seller side yet. It's just
Interesting.
they don't have the bandwidth or the capital to make the investments that the larger firms do. And
I
so
think we're
that
going to
that actually will continue to separate the two as well.
I think we're going to start to see these highly efficient operators within the next 12 to 18 months. Like I think
I
the
don't doubt that. I haven't seen it yet. I do
yeah,
think I definitely can tell a tech forward owner that, I mean, there are guys like I think of myself as like someone who is on the bleeding edge of technology to my detriment sometimes, but there's definitely those out there that are deploying it, and it'll show up.
yeah, I mean it's not even just a matter of adoption. I think it's a matter of where the technology is right now. Like, I mean, a year ago, and we've talked about it on the show ad nauseum, but like a year ago, it was the note taker. And like, that's a big lift and it's an efficiency gain. But in order to really get more value out of it and to really use it to sort of supercharge your practice, it has to be in more than just meetings. And like now these things are expanding. They're taking activities for you, they're helping with prospecting and lead gen or plugging into those systems. Some of these AI CRMs are now plugging into your custodial data and they're pulling in information on RMDs and things like that, making it easier to do different things. So now they're starting to really get to a point where like the tech is there and now just the users need to figure out how to use it. And if only there was a firm that could help them, shout out to WealthTech Select. If now that they figure out how to use these tools effectively and put it in the frame of how do I serve my clients better and grow my business and scale it, I think now we'll start to see those returns. So there's probably a handful of companies that are already doing that effectively, but I think we're at the very beginning of
Yeah,
having some real
I agree.
utility
Like
here.
we were talking previously, that's just learning how to think about the applications of
Yeah.
a AI tool, whether it's an LLM or agents, it's like how to deploy it in my business. It really takes deep thought and hopefully better vendors, better products where they articulate these are the use cases in your industry. Like, let's apply this. Because I think that's where it's like
Yeah,
this,
I think it
like,
really is a cultural question more than a technology question. I think Kitsis made this point on our podcast, which is that only a certain number of people only revisit tools so often, and there's only a certain number of advisors who can revisit tools. So there's always going to be a slow adoption rate within all financial advisors. And so he's always surprised how big the Kitsis map is considering that slow adoption rate. But then I mean, one example I can think of is Root Financial, where James has done an incredible job completely running his business differently and at a much higher growth rate from what I can tell. Of course, none of this is public data, but it seems like he has a much higher growth rate than any other advisor I've seen out there. And by the way, not using any kind of very sophisticated tech stack, but just changing the way he operates and then using some basic off-the-shelf tools. I think we've had Joe Moss talk about how he just uses HubSpot primarily as a CRM. I think that's really interesting how I think there's going to be a change in culture and also maybe like a new generation of RIAs that are just operating the practice differently. And I think to your point, James, in the next 12 months, we're going to see examples of this where they're really going to stand out and people are going to get really excited. And I think we're just at the very beginning of this for sure. I guess I was curious thinking about your methodology a little bit, Alan. If I understand correctly, you're really focused primarily on compatibility and then price second, right? And your idea is that compatibility is really the most important thing to figure out. Let's not just make it a primary auction. And it does remind me a little bit about how here I'm in Silicon Valley here. Often when you're being recruited for a startup, you're being asked to sign up for the mission and not focus on your comp. And it feels like a way to get you comfortable with taking a very low salary. How do you basically tell your buyers, that this is actually the right way? And I would love if you could tell some stories of like, a transaction that went wrong because someone wasn't thinking of it that way, or like, if you can like double click a little bit into that, I think
Yeah.
people would be really interested in that.
So here's the thing that I think my competitors, because we're so big out there on trying to get compatibility right, which run a smaller process where you can really get to know your prospective partner and vet culture, which I think you can only experience. You cannot measure it. You got to just interact with people and determine if you're aligned. But they think that I'm saying that at the expense of price. Okay. It's like I'm there. It's either you can get price or you can get culture. You can't have both. And that's not at all what I'm saying. I'm saying, in my opinion, and this to me, it's no one has data for this. Like I can't, because I don't have access to all our competitors' valuations and what kind of valuations they're getting versus us, and they don't have ours. But I can tell you, it makes a hell of a lot of common sense when you think about it. Like, what would motivate a buyer, a good buyer that you would actually want to be a part of? What would motivate them to be aggressive in price and terms? Is it auction fever, the fear of missing out, time pressure, all of those psychological things embedded in auctions? Or would it be someone who falls in love with you because they believe the fit is so strong and the strategic alignment is so powerful that they've got to have you? Which one would produce the higher offer? And I think it's just common sense that if you attempt to measure compatibility first, and that compatibility measure tells you who you should talk to, that's what that does. And then you have a linear, purposeful way of going about interacting with them to get to the point of conviction from the seller's perspective and the buyer's perspective. That is what will produce a better, more aggressive price and better terms. And that, unfortunately, I don't have any hard data that supports that, nor do my competitors who run auctions that supports theirs. I do get why you would think, hey, let's have 50 buyers bidding against one another, and that will drive up the price. But I'm like, okay, you're telling me you would sacrifice, let's say that was true. And I agreed, I'm not agreeing, but to say I agreed that, okay, the auction produces 2 turns of the multiple higher than a culturally led process. You would really sell your business, your team, and your clients down the road for 2 turns of the multiple more? If that answer is yes, I don't want to work with you anyway.
Is an earnout usually a part of this deal? Because it feels like the earnout is the answer to that question, where if you're not going to be around for the earnout because you just don't get along with these people, then you are going to get less return.
The earnout is part of most every deal we do, and it's a very real thing. So I would tell you do want to distinguish between your headline offer, which is the one that gets put in CityWire and all the magazines and so forth, and that's the one they talk about is the headline offer, which is a combination of the base offer and the earnout. You really need to understand what the earnout component of that is. What are the terms and parameters around that earnout? Is it realistic based on your historic growth rates to assume you're going to grow at that target? On valuations, people always want to throw around the multiple. I'm more interested in what is EBITDA.
Mm.
It's like the multiple is great, and that's a nice data point, but what is it on? Because if we gave a buyer a P&L that said there was $1 million of EBITDA, right, in the current business, and they send it back and EBITDA is now 700,000, but they were offering us a 12x multiple on that. It's great, and plus 2 turns and an earnout, so it's a 4x headline number. That sounds awesome at the country club, but it was based on a EBITDA number that was $300,000 less. So they allocated cost into that P&L to depress EBITDA. So when I do the implied multiple, it's much lower than what you actually think it is.
I
And
see.
so
Yep.
the multiples are great, but let's talk about what is EBITDA to begin with, and how is it increased or decreased from what we thought it was at the onset of the engagement? And that's more important.
So I have a question for you, taking it a different direction. So, for a long time, the wirehouses kind of ran the game, and you started seeing a big move in terms of breakaways and everybody seeking independence. And now we have a lot of large aggregators, and this is something I've heard from multiple people. It's not even coming from me directly. That like it seems like we're going right back to the same thing. We went from wirehouses to independence, independence to aggregators. Do you agree with that at all, or disagree? And is there something different this time around?
I disagree for the foundational reason is the aggregators are all independent RIAs. So they're not product houses, to begin with. And so when you meet the executive teams of these independent firms, even though there may be 50 billion or $100 billion, they were 10 billion, 5 billion 5 years ago,
Mm.
and so they have the same ethos, let's say, of the smaller firm that's being acquired, meaning they are fiduciaries, they care deeply about the outcomes for their clients and their teams, and they started in the independent space. So it's just a bigger version of the seller. So no, I don't. Now it could get corporate-y, but that's a different thing
Yeah.
than this independence issue. That I think takes place as the firms get bigger and bigger and bigger. There's this. It's one of the early things we try to vet with a seller is like, where do you want to join a buyer on their journey? There are the larger, historically acquisitive firms that are 50, 100, 300 billion plus. That's a very, very different environment than the $5-10 billion firm who's just starting out on an M&A trajectory. Some sellers would say, I want to be a part of a larger, well-established firm where the cake has been baked. I don't have to think about all of the processes and validating all the things they're asking me to change. It's all done, it all works, and it's stable. And there are sellers who say, I want nothing to do with that. I'm okay with a firm that maybe is still in the building mode. The plane is still being built while they're in air. A little bit of chaos perhaps, but it's entrepreneurial. They feel like they're actually locking arms with them and building. So I think it's not an issue of independence, like going back towards the environments where the advisors don't feel like they can make recommendations in the client's best interest. But I do think the issue is the environment could ultimately become a bureaucracy, like a corporate bureaucracy and they value like the smaller entrepreneurial vibe more.
So I have another question kind of along the same line. So I feel like you're in a position to have greater insight to this than most. So with these aggregators, right? I've seen there's a few different flavors of what it looks like, obviously in how they acquire you, but also in how much they're dictating in terms of technology stack, certain compliance things, marketing, etc. Have you seen one model work better than another, one that's more homogeneous versus one that allows a lot greater, I'll still call it independence or flexibility? Is one
Yeah,
working better
flexibility
than the
is
other?
better. First of all, I would say I've yet to meet the buyer, regardless of size, that calls himself an aggregator. They all call
They don't
themselves
like that term for whatever
they
reason.
they really dislike it. And so,
But what's the right term then?
I mean, acquirer, like it's like it's a significant part of your growth strategy is inorganic acquisitions. But okay. So, but the point is the integration. Like, what degree of integration do they drive? And this gets back to that spectrum of autonomy that I talked about earlier. In that, what does the buyer require you to change?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's start there. I would say table stakes are all of the operational aspects of the business. So the tech stack is changing. Like, I don't know a buyer who does not require you to be on their tech stack. I'm talking about the full acquisition models. If it's a minority investor who you're the platform they're investing in, I mean, they're going to keep your technology. But for most of the firms that are joining these larger firms, you've got to adopt their technology. There's no other way that they could support you. All of the things that you would be seeking in terms of business lift cannot occur unless you're on their systems and fully integrated. So that's sort of like table stakes. You should fully expect that you're going to adopt their technology. They're going to take over payroll and bill pay and benefits and technology management. All that stuff is sort of like true for everyone. The back office. Now, the next step I would say would be the operational components of the business, like your client service, relationship manager, trading, things like that. That does vary. There are buyers who will say we want to centralize trading. There are buyers who say if you want to keep trading locally, we'll permit you to do that. There are buyers who your operational staff at the day after close are going to report up through a central team who now manages them for their job. They're not being managed locally for their job. There are buyers who that all stays local. So these are autonomy questions that we have to really understand. Like, you'll find that we break it up into 6 areas of autonomy. There's strategic decision making, financial decision making, decisions regarding your staff, decisions regarding your client experience, which is your financial planning and portfolio management recommendations, decisions regarding your calendar, and your growth profile. We break it up into those 6 categories to sort of pierce the veil of losing control and independence in this binary fashion. And you'll find when you do that, you'll find out that as an owner, you're quite happy to get rid of a lot of these decisions, and you can get very specific on the things that you want to keep. Okay. So the biggest one I would say is the client experience. So advisors really feel passionate about maintaining control over the recommendations they're making to their clients. Now, I bifurcate that. There's the planning recommendations and then there's the investment recommendations. Most buyers will permit you to continue making all the financial planning recommendations. They don't want to take it off your plate. They may have some para planning resources that can assist you iterate on plans and create recommendations, but ultimately you're always going to be responsible for that. The big one is the investment piece. So all the buyers have an investment platform of stuff. It's a menu of strategies and models, some internally managed, some externally managed, that everyone has. The question is, do they require you to stop managing the money and move to their platform, or will they allow you to continue? And that's all over the board. I find that most buyers are of the opinion that your highest and best use isn't in portfolio management. So they would like you to adopt their models, but many of them, if you feel very strongly about it, they'll continue letting you manage money. That's with an asterisk by it because you got to make sure you're not doing something crazy. But these are all autonomy questions
Yeah.
that are very granular, and you need to be specific. And there's so many buyers out there now that their models, whatever scenario you present, we can tell you these are the buyers that will meet all of your criteria there.
That makes a lot of sense.
That's what Lens
That
does.
shows how the compatibility matching, like, I mean, just hearing it sounds so far superior
Yeah.
to
It
another
also
way to
feels
go
like you
about it.
could probably do really well with a side business where you help couples who are about to get married, just figure out.
Yeah, it's funny when I was designing Lens, I actually
Because I've got a whiteboard for you.
I logged into Match.com because I wanted to see how that was. I've been married for 34 years. My wife is fantastic, but she caught me on Match.com, and I had some explaining to do
It's
as
for
to
work.
why I was on. I was like, I'm not on it for this reason. I'm trying to look at the process of how the questions
It's
they're asking.
for research. It's for
You're the
research.
second person I've talked to who said they were using Match.com for business research.
Is that right? Yeah. Well, it's very helpful, to be honest with
Well, they have a lot of experience. A lot of experience with that. Well, I guess we're sort of getting towards the end here, so we like to end with some rapid fire questions. And I guess the go-to we've had recently is, what do you think is the most underrated and the most overrated piece of AI technology out there, in your
the
experience?
most overrated piece of AI. I
It could
guess I
be
would
tech, it
say,
could be a use case for it. Take it wherever you want.
yeah. Let me start with the most underrated. It's in the mapping of data. Like, for example, in our world, we're dealing with financial statements and P&Ls and all the stuff from buyers, and it's I have full-time people. That's all they do historically was dig into the seller's P&L, and you should imagine, you should see how they produce it. Sometimes I've literally gotten images of P&L, not an Excel spreadsheet all the time,
I mean,
and
you'd
we
think
have to
financial
map that
advisors
over.
would be real pros at that, by the way. That's really surprising. Of all the things that they would be able to produce, you'd think a good
Yes, that's
yeah.
kind of shocking sometimes, the lack of organization. But so this incredibly structured data that comes in a variety of formats: PDF, Word document, Excel, image, JPEG, that stuff. Being able to extract that and automate the mapping of all of that really complex data that's all labeled, so it's identifying data in a variety of forms, labeling it properly, and extracting it to another tool that we would use is like a massively powerful application. And I think that would be true in financial advisors' practices too, because they're collecting data from clients in
Yeah.
variety of forms. I can tell you, we've taken a process that would be 30 to 50 hours and turned it into 30 minutes
Mm,
um,
that's
of, of,
impressive.
of data extraction and mapping. So that would be one that I remember the first time I talked to a vendor about doing that. I was like, why am I spending time on this? And I had no idea the impact it would have on our business. So, like, for example, we can take 5 offers from buyers that typically come in a PDF document, and there's 10 pages of legalese or wording, and there's probably 30 data points that are really important, but it's confusing to read through it and understand what they all mean. Again, we used to take hours and hours to get that data out and put it in a form a seller could use. That's 10 minutes for us now. It's wonderful. So
And that's something
um,
you've built yourself or using off the
that's
shelf?
something we built ourselves. Yeah,
Yep.
that's a
Okay,
that's a
great.
tool.
Do you want to
So that
shout
would be
out
the
the
most.
tool or the vendor you used for that?
I'm sorry?
You want to shout out the tool or the vendor you used for that in case people are interested?
The vendor, it was called V7,
Okay, great.
V7 Labs. Someone who was willing to write the check that I did, that got go get it, so it's, wonderful, wonderful. So that would be like the most underrated application for it. Most overrated, I guess we spent a lot of time talking about the note taker. It's like it does serve a wonderful purpose today. It's very organizational, but I say overrated because we're not using it to the extent that I think it can be used.
Agree with
It's like
that.
if all you're using a note taker for is summarizing a meeting notes, that's a really weak use case. It's not using the capabilities of it
Yeah.
that it can.
It's almost like you're saying it's like overhyped versus what you're actually using it for, but there might actually be potential in using it better. And so there's some kind of
Absolutely. Like
that needs to be addressed.
we're using note takers in ways, for example, like for onboarding new employees, that we have to train them on processes, common questions that we deal with and responses. We've got, thousands of hours of recorded conversations that we now import. We can have AI go in and identify the common questions that are posed to us and what are the proper responses that we want our new employee to learn and understand. Stuff like that, where it's taking the note taking function and really using it for meaningful business purposes that we never really thought of when we
Yeah.
first bought the technology.
Well, it all goes back to like people trying to have the right mindset to figure out how to use it, right? So there's note taking and it's like, okay, great. That helped me take the note, maybe prep for the meeting, do some other stuff. You could think about how you could take those actions farther, but then there's like, how do I use this data in aggregate from an advisor standpoint, and some of the note takers are building this in, but there's like sentiment, right? And so like, what are my clients asking about? Like, is there a sudden spike? Is there market volatility? And now there's a sudden spike in concerns about market fluctuations. Like, what is going on? What are trends? So that you could be more proactive with engaging in your messaging. Like, there's all different ways to use it on like a micro and macro level. And then you brought up a great one of like internal, right? Train your staff, use it to onboard people. Here's the questions we answer. This is what a typical engagement looks like. Refine your process. See if you have consistency or inconsistency with how you're engaging with customers. There's
There's
all
so
sorts of
much.
great use cases that you could use once you have these transcripts, regardless of whether your current note taker does those functions. If you have the
There's
data,
so much valuable information, and it's across the team. It's not just me. It's my partner and our staff, and
it's
as
internal
they're working,
meetings.
it's all of the meetings because everything is recorded.
Yeah.
And so the volume of information that's embedded in that. I mean, you could literally just give it the transcripts, for example, and ask it to analyze it for anything that would be relevant to your business. And if your tool understood your business, it would probably come back with some pretty cool observations.
Absolutely. Yeah. I
So
think I think
that
it's
would be mine.
especially for the work you're doing. I mean, at some point, that level of having 10 years of detailed transcripts would be really useful for figuring out cultural compatibility and all those things, right?
That's right.
Like a whole different set of data because there's how people think they are, and then how they actually are. Like I pitched myself when we were starting this podcast to James as being a very amicable, polite host, but then he found out I'm actually someone who interrupts all the time. So it's like and I only realized that once I started listening to my own podcast. It's actually always good to have like a
We're
recorded.
supposed to interrupt each other. That's not a
That's true.
problem with the
Then we just made it
podcast.
a rule. We just normalize.
I make fun of you. I poke fun at you because of the question, tangent, question, and a question.
That's right. It's totally fair. Totally fair. I stacked my questions. Well, a final thing I wanted to ask Alan, like I imagine, do you share how many deals you do are working on at a given time? Is it like 15 to 30 deals at a given time?
Yeah, no, it's it ranges. I would say like at a low end, 10 to 20, 25 a year is sort of. So it's anywhere between that. I've tried to figure out the rhyme or reason for deal flow over the years, and it sort of ebbs and flows, and I have never figured it out.
So you're
But
like
say
you're
call it
sort of
15 to 20. Yeah,
yeah. So you're watching like a couple of dozen romantic comedies happen in real life all the time.
that's
And
a great
will
way
they,
of
won't
describing
they?
it.
Yeah, will they, won't they? What's going to happen, right? There's drama every day. And
Yeah,
I guess some of these romantic comedies, the most entertaining ones are the ones that go south and don't work out. And so I'm just curious, like, can you maybe describe what are the scenarios where things don't work out, where advisors have misconceptions about the process or, are people are just completely misaligned? I would love to hear a little
Yeah,
bit about
well,
that.
I'll tell you, it's a good question. Like, what causes deals to blow up?
Exactly.
Yeah, and it is unfortunately, it's usually rooted in some issue with the seller. Okay,
Mm,
if it's the buyer, it's usually a unseasoned corporate development team. It just doesn't know what they're doing. They don't know the cadence to run. It's usually not the money. Like the money is figured out pretty early in the process.
interesting. All right.
Um, and so the to me, it's usually the ego or irrational fear of the seller eventually expressing itself in attitude and negative interactions with the buyer's team.
Interesting.
So yeah, and so like that's one of the first things that we try to vet with our clients is, and I learned this from Joe Duran. It was the only thing he ever taught me about it at United was ask the question, are they humble and do you like them?
Mm,
And if the answer to those questions are yes, the odds are then I'll like them. This is Joe telling me. And sort of I've sort of adopted that philosophy here. It's sort of like dating, like you're on your best behavior early. And then as you get further in the relationship, the real you comes out. That happens in this process. There is a thing called deal fatigue that, it is a very intellectually exhausting and emotional exhausting process for a seller. So that's okay. But when you start when your real self starts surfacing and it's negative, that's when the deals blow up. It's emotion and irrational fear or lack of humility. Our industry is full of ego. We know that. And
Is it
if
probably
you're
better that they blow up? I mean, obviously, you'd wish you identified it earlier, but at that point, should they
yeah,
just
I would I wish when it's happened to us, I feel horrible that I didn't uncover that earlier
right.
because I think we have a good reputation with the buyers. And if something surfaces after like an LOI is signed and it's like something, an attitude or an ego problem that we should have picked up, that's something that I feel like we should have done. And it's
Yeah.
happened a few times.
I mean, how do you assess that humility? Because I mean, you can ask questions and you can say, "Are you humble?" And I'm the most humble person in the world. Like, how do you actually figure that out? You must have a really good spidey sense.
Well, it's hard to hide. One of the first tells for me is when when we talk about how important culture and all that is, and they're like, yeah, 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 yeah. What's the multiple?
Mm,
And like it's like I understand you want to maximize your valuation. That's like a given. We do too, you know. But if that's all you want to talk about, that's a really early tell for me that I've got someone who's just paying lip service. Like Carl Heckenberg told me one time, he's like, when code is culture for cash, you know, he's
mm.
like, that's an early tell for me. So if like, and I've had that happen before where I get on with someone and all they want to talk about, they don't care about the team fit, the integration, the clients, the changes. They just want to know what the check is going to be like.
it makes sense. The questions, who are they concerned about in this
That's right.
deal?
Yeah. Yeah. If it's all about you, like our best clients, it's clear early. The number one concern is their clients.
Mm,
And then their number two concern is their team.
mm.
They obviously want a great outcome for themselves, but number one and two have to be right first, or they're not moving forward with a deal. And we love that because, and here's the thing, if you're like that, you're probably going to have a great financial outcome because the buyers want that. That's what they're looking for. Again, they're just bigger versions of you.
Mm,
And they want partners because it is a partner model. Most of these transactions, you're taking equity, you're still an owner, and they've got to look you in the eye on the other side of the transaction. And they want people who are, you don't have to not to be perfect. It's not a panacea, but like treat them like humans, treat them like you would treat hopefully your team if you're good to your team members, and just be nice, be humble. So that would be my answer.
I
that's
love it.
great.
I think that's a great point to end. Alan, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. Really enjoyed. I kind of like this. This was a little bit of a deviation from like, we talked plenty of AI, but like more professional services, more fit, a little less technical is kind of a
Well,
nice,
something that's on a lot of people's minds for sure.
yeah.
A lot of people, from what I can tell, are thinking through this. So I think it's awesome. And yeah, don't want to make you late for your event. You need to get your
Yeah,
neon
all
spandex
good.
on. So we'll leave you to it.
All right, guys, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate it. We look forward to hope maybe doing this again one day.
That would be
Sounds good.
great.
Thanks,
Okay.
Alan.
Take care,
All
Alan.
right.
Bye.